That's weird. Hmm? Hmm? Where'd she go? I don't know where. I don't know where she went. Stream died. Yes, my hotspot turned off for some reason. I don't know why. Uh, maybe I need to refresh here. They live, they die, they live again. I know. Get your Morse code readers ready. We're going live in 5. Yes. So for some reason I do not see Annika in the studio that I pipe shit in from. Though it's possible that's yeah, there she is. Okay, that was me, as usual. Okay, hello, hi. Uh, okay, hello, back at it. Good lord. Here's the plan. Trans.Peaks calls Devin on a regular phone call, and Devin goes on speakerphone and holds it up to the mic. That sounds awful. Thanks, y'all. I hate it. Control V. Yes. Okay. All right. She's back, everyone. And by she, I mean me back online with her. Okay. I can hear myself now off of your speaker,
You
maybe off
sound
your
quieter
device.
than before, too.
Oh, interesting.
People are saying everything's frozen. It's just a black screen.
Well, mobile sucks, so I'm not taking responsibility for that. The mobile fucking sucks, even more than my computer. Steam works. What about Steam works?
I think that says stream, Devin, but we know where your mind's at.
Yes, Stream works. Oh, yeah. God damn it. It's just, the chat's small for me, so that's I'm normal. Um, okay, we're so back, folks. Thanks everybody. Um, okay, so where last we left off talking about it's, and this is really the meat of the piece. We're talking about gender as class position. You can't choose your class position. Exist in conflict with one another. That's part of what makes them a class, and we know as a given that there is a gender class that's the subaltern class, that you're like the third gendering was the language used for it. The subaltern class, the faggot subaltern, depending on which version of this Cizen is writing, but the people who are penalized for not falling into the approved kind of gender binary categories. And one of the things that you were talking about before, the internet was trying to silence women. My internet was trying to silence women.
Thank you for taking the responsibility
Yes, was some
for
of
one of the
the
good ones.
well, don't blow too much smoke up my ass because you never know. Um, uh, that some of this stuff is contextual or conditional
Hmm. Yeah,
in how people
and
experience
that
it.
you're, yeah, the gender class that's assigned to you is kind of fluid. The boundaries between the classes are kind of fuzzy and not hard set. Um, and that's what it gets into too, is that a lot of the ways that those gender classes are upheld is through conflict, and they are kind of upheld through people fighting over where the boundaries exist and trying to push people down into the subaltern, for example. And yeah, so that you don't want to view it as like you are this thing, so you belong to this class. It's more, you know, how useful is it for you to belong to a given class at any given point?
Mm,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's and it's really interesting what you just said about how like people will kind of use subalternization to kind of like jockey for position or establish
mhm.
their position. And that makes me think of that video that you shared in your excellent Substack piece, which I'll shout out and put in the chat. But that American reflex video
Reflex, yeah.
where, which we'll link out, but it basically shows like uh, people, including cis women, kind of trying to establish position or reaffirm their own position of power by saying this person is not a woman, this person is not, and this was not a trans woman that they were targeting, but it was trans misogyny that they were using in that case. But like, I don't know, I just think of all kinds of things that like even that we were like doing as kids, as like mean kids on the playground, of like, oh, you're
Hmm.
not really like, she's not a girl because she doesn't do this thing, or she didn't start shaving her leg hair yet, or like she hasn't gotten her period yet, so she's not really a girl and we're disgusted with her. Just these weird like kind of schoolgirl taunt kid gender violence that is subalternization. um
Yeah.
or like, oh, this kid stands in a queer way or whatever. Like it's a it's a tool people use to kind of establish dominance or terrorize people.
Hmm.
Um,
And I think it's something too that a lot of cis feminism kind of got close to figuring out in some ways. Um, and like there's a lot of like it explains, like pick me's, the way that women will side with men who would be in the power class and women are in the not power class to try and subaltern other women and go like, hey, we're not like those, disgusting freaks, we're not like those angry feminists, like we're the good ones. And that not power class tries to like cling to its power by pushing other people down into the subaltern.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of like respectability politics and like kind of pick me
Mm-hmm.
behaviors really fit in this framework of like you're drawing the line, or you're possibly even redrawing the line and saying like, no, it's just us, it's just white women who are
Yeah.
thin or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
trad wives, women who do xyz. um, they're they're the one we're the ones who actually occupy this position, and anyone else is not, because then that reaffirms, that gives you more status if it's a smaller bubble, um, and more people to invoke violence against. um, so yeah, those are the core premises of the theory. With these as understood as true, we can derive a few things. Firstly, those which are gendered as subaltern occupy a political gender underclass. Secondly, this must mean that these gender subalterns, as we will understand them, are trivially legible to gender power. Thirdly, that gender relation is just that, a relation, a class relation, which arises from the political context and its implicit material conditions. Gender exists in the sinew of social relation between an individual and their society. It does not exist in the soul, nor does it exist as some kind of essential characteristic of a person, biological or otherwise. You do not have a gender. You did not discover your gender, at least from the perspective of gender class. What happened was that you were gendered. You were made subject to gender. Gender was inscribed into you through violence, carved into your flesh and made physicalized in the ways in which you have clipped your nails, cut your hair, tied your clothes, lilted or gruffed your voice, grown or shaved your face or your legs, in the way that you have access to material resources, how you relate to your labor, how you move through the world, and what further violences you are or are not subjected to. Gender happens to you the way a hurricane happens to a coastal city, without choice or autonomy, not as an act of agency, but as a phenomenon of blind, chaotic circumstance, a confluence of tiny eddies and butterfly flappings, of minute fluctuations of heat and moisture that eventually coalesce into a power through violence, and to incomprehensible destructive consequences. Or perhaps it is more like the way a mob happens to a trampled victim, crushed by the immense weight of social history and political momentum. No individual person has the power to stop it on their own, yet every individual moves it, a force of emergent collective violence. Gender is not a feeling or a state of existence or an innate, irrevocable quality. It is a process which is constantly and forcefully applied to a person by a society, like a factory where weapons are laser cut out of stamped pieces of sheet metal. It is the process by which gender hegemony attempts to continue replicating its existence. A great steaming factory of blood and cruelty, which continuously prints droids encoded with the single instruction of continue the war.
So one thing that I really like from that part is the no individual person has the power to stop it on their own, yet every individual moves it,
Yes.
a force of emergent collective violence. And I feel like that really just drives home the way that we're all socialized into this system. We're all encouraged to participate in it and to enact that violence on each other. Um, and it is something that is just like so deeply ingrained in our society and our upbringing that you really have to like be conscious of that and work to undo it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really like that that framing kind of does away with some of the issues of like when people get too much in the weeds about is this horizontal aggression? Can this person oppress this other person?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like cuz that's too individualized, right? Like it's more like subalternization is this like tool that people can reach for if they have
Mhm.
any little foothold over you. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
like you can be a part of that mob regardless of whether, you're also queer or whatever. Like, you know.
And I feel like it also talks about something that you write about a lot with a lot of like pop feminism stuff that's just like, oh, you just need to unlearn your misogyny and learn how to be confident. And if you're just a confident woman, like you'll succeed. And that's why it's like no individual person has the power to stop it. Like no amount of like rebelling against the system is going to like materially benefit your life in that way. um, you're still going to be oppressed by it, and
Mhm.
there's still going to be everyone else oppressing you. It's not, and that is something that like liberal feminism really wants to do, is to put all the responsibility on the individual to just girl boss their way out of these things.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, it's this very personalized, oh, if you just ask for a raise more, if you lean in, if you do
Yeah.
whatever, um you'll be able to overcome these things. But that doesn't change like the material forces are, statistically these groups have less access to resources, and those things still affect you, even if you are like, or they affect people writ large, even if there are like individual girl bosses that do ask for a
Hmm.
raise or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Grand Chicken Lord asks, in simplified terms, can we summarize gender in this context as how wider society sees you, categorizes you, and how because of that, how it acts on you? Um,
I feel like, yeah,
yeah, I
I
think
think that
that's
makes sense.
yeah, I think that's relatively close. I think um, I think there's still a metaphor there, right? Like how society sees you. That's like a dead metaphor, right? Like we don't take it literally, but like I think if I wanted to be like super nitpicky, it would I think it would just be like it's not even like society doesn't see you; it just does these things, right? Like, and we can summarize
Yeah.
the things done to you with what your gender class is, you know?
Yeah, and then I think a lot of this like acts with a kind of subconscious lack of intent that, the like seeing you sort of implies that like there's more of an intent and action behind that.
Right? Yeah. Um, which again, metaphorically, we do all the time, but like I think that makes it sound more static or identity based than it actually is, where it's like
Hmm.
these are like the forces, and they just affect you if you're in a certain position, like regardless. Um, yeah. Um, Gender class using power as the measure for defining any person's position in a sort of fluctuating hierarchy. Um, I'll have to think about that one, but I think there's something there.
Hmm.
It's interesting because it's both the power of people and just like societal forces that are bigger than an individual person's privilege or whatever over you. Uh, Continuing right along. As people of political consciousness, it is necessary that we understand correctly where the enemy lies. The enemy is not in gender roles or their constraints on how people can express their genders, which are themselves innately neutral or even good. The enemy is gender itself, the system of power in its totality, which must be overturned. A revolutionary politic is necessary to create the requisite conditions for the successful dismantling of the class system. The goal of feminism is not equality between men and women. The goal of feminism, when it understands men and women as approximate words for reaching the descriptions of the extant power classes, is a world where men and women cease to exist altogether. Liberté, égalité, sororité. A classless society is the eternal promise of Marxism Leninism. In service of this, we must advance this cause for all political class systems. And so we move forth. So this is like gender class abolition, not gendered abolition the way a lot of
Hmm.
people use it, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Likewise, it is trivial for us to know that there are members of the gender class system who are themselves oppressed, but not made subaltern. The not powers, who are subject to the powers. These can be somewhat analogously read to the relationship that the proletarians of the imperial core, who are themselves not made subaltern, have with the bourgeois of the imperial core. I really like this point a
Hmm.
lot. Um, that there are these two existing gender classes that have some degree of power and status, the powers and the not powers, but they're still within this like bubble of protection in a way.
Yeah, and it's like I'm an impressed poor trans woman in the United States, but I mean, I still very much have the power over people in the third world, and my existence like totally relies on exploiting them. And even though I don't have power under the economic power in the US, I still leverage a massive amount of economic power across the world. Um, so yeah, I really do like that example that they're using there.
Yeah, yeah, it's really nice, and that's still a real controversial point for a lot of people who are Americans or people in the Imperial Core.
Yeah,
Like we hate to
and
hear
it's
it, but
and it's also something that so many people on the left, and like self included, really really struggle with, is like how much of that power are you actually willing to give up to help someone else,
mhm,
or are you going to try and do your activism from a place that is comfy for you and you don't have to sacrifice anything.
right, yeah, yeah. Like there's just so much about our like just what we're able to access in terms of like food and resources and wealth that is so dependent on the U.S. and other countries extracting it from the world violently for like centuries, and like if we upend that, it's gonna be a quality of life change
Mhm.
for
But at the same
Americans.
time, like, all that said, I'm not in a position of power. Like,
Right.
you know, I I'm not one of the ones making these decisions. I'm not really in a, place to be changing them. Um, but I'm certainly in a place that I can latch on to the small scraps that I have, and ignore the consequences for other people.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And I think again there's a really nice one to one analogy there for the position that a lot of cis women have like historically held on to within the patriarchy, that they were not in a leadership position, they wouldn't have representation in government, but they still had access to wealth and protection in their name, violence launched in the name of protecting them and things like that, while still not
Mhm.
having, you know, traditionally much influence in their political system.
And then Dog Creature says this just nests on top of all kinds of marginalization and oppression that happens to one under capitalism like perfectly. And I think one of the reasons it does that so well is because it's Marxism, it's capitalist critique applied to gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And it explains how gender functions under capitalism, essentially.
yeah. It does it so beautifully in a way that like makes understanding some of those Marxist critiques easier too. Like if that's not
Yeah.
your world, um, yeah, it's so good. It's so elegant. Finally, there exists a dominant power class, a gender class who stands to benefit most from this class rule, whose class interests confer the class character of the system as it stands, the dictatorship of gender power. These we will here call the powers. Thus, we have our three genders: power, not power, and subaltern.
And I think one of the things I really like about this essay is that, I feel if you wanted to like help put those terms into context and explain them, it would be the people in power are cis men, the people that don't have power are cis women, and then the subaltern are the trans women, the faggots, everyone else who they can't fit into those two boxes to be useful. Um, but I think that's one. I feel like it gets away from defining feminism and gender around like cis man and womanhood, by recategorizing them as like power, not power, and subaltern.
Yeah,
Um, and I can't remember if it touches on this too, but it also talks about how, or at least addresses how, somebody like a disabled cis man might not belong to the power class.
Right.
um he might get bumped down to the not power class, possibly even to the subaltern, depending on what his disability is, and how much it impacts things. So I like that because it's really taking gender analysis, but like kind of stripping the concept of like man, woman, cis, and trans out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really nicely done. Like, and there are cis women who would not exist in the not power category, right? Who would be in the subaltern
Hmm.
because they have for whatever reason, because of fat phobia,
Well,
because of ableism, because
yeah,
of
and totally. And like I mentioned earlier, that I feel like cis feminism got kind of close to this theory in a lot of ways. Monique Vitigue, um, like lesbian separatist kind of writer. She talked about that, how lesbians aren't women, and like what she meant by that is that lesbians exist as a third gender. Like, she didn't have this language, but lesbians were subaltern because they refused to define themselves in relationship to men. They served no real usefulness to patriarchy. They didn't fulfill the role of women that patriarchy expected of them. So, like, really, they weren't even gendered like women. Um, which also explains too why lesbians faced as much like street harassment and violence and stuff as they did, because they weren't afforded the like conditional protection that patriarchy offers women, like similar to the way trans women are third gendered. Like, they were seen as acceptable sites for violence. Um and so, yeah, again, like I just love this language because it ends up becoming applicable to like so many different things. And I feel like it kind of solves some of the oppression Olympics type issues of like people fighting over like which identity has it worse and blah blah blah, because it's more about the process of what happens to people.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, the threat powers have to make not powers into subaltern just isn't correlated to mask and fem at all, because of sex workers and others are also made subaltern. Yeah, I think
Yeah, exactly.
that's a
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah, I mean, like, slut shaming is like even just a great example of that. Like, slut shaming is an attempt to like subaltern a woman and, say that she's not doing womanhood correctly. She's not devoting herself to the power class like she's supposed to. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and by making it power, not power, subaltern, you escape all of these little debates about like what is a man, what is a woman, how are these things defined, blah blah,
Hmm.
and it defines in this case a lot of the people that are in not power are cis women, not exclusively, but what defines it is you are in a position of you are the disempowered one and your gender role is to kind of uplift men's power and have men's power enacted upon you in certain ways, so you're supposed to be accessible to men, under men's control, and to embody that in certain ways, and like that's what it is. And if you are not available in those ways, or there's something about it that's like threatening to this existing power structure, then you can be subalternized, and that's
Yeah.
like the mechanism.
And
Um,
I also like, I love that it kind of gives all of these different oppressed groups a sort of like common language that they can use when talking about these things, which, you know, ideally, I think this would like really help with class solidarity and class consciousness and getting people to recognize their struggles in each other, in each other's experiences, if we're all kind of using the same language, instead of, like lesbian separatist turfs fighting over like their experience of being subaltern, and trans women fighting over their experience of being subaltern. Like, I don't know. In an ideal world, I would love to see like a turf read this and just be like, oh wow, like we experienced the same thing.
Wouldn't that be lovely if they could be
Yeah,
reached in that way?
there's open, I don't know.
I mean, I think certainly
But
some
again, though,
people
like
who go ahead.
the way that TERFs attack trans women is their attempt to escape subalternization as well. Like that's their attempt to, you know, hang on to being the not power class.
Hmm.
Um, and you notice too that TERFs like never actually fight for or advance for women or fight against patriarchy or men. Like they don't give a shit about deconstructing the power class. They just want to hang on to that not power class by shoving trans women down.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and how a lot of like the detrans turf movement kind of like poaches
Mm-hmm.
and radicalizes people is a lot of course there's the people who like never even transitioned in the first place and it's just all a bad faith thing, but a lot of times they are poaching are people who have been subalternized, trans people who do look visibly like othered and different and have experiences that are challenging and like trying to say, oh no no no, you still exist in this not power category, you can still get back to this
Yeah.
unsubalternized position if you just reaffirm your womanhood and disavow and da da da, instead
Mm-hmm.
of saying like, no, actually, the things you're experiencing right now rhyme a whole lot with like trans women's experiences and other groups' experiences, and they're not your enemy here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
are Twinkie bisexual cis men subaltern? Yeah. Well, how Twinkie? We're gonna need photo
Yeah.
evidence. Uh,
No, and I feel like that's a good example of like someone whose identity probably exists in the fuzzy area and probably gets pushed back and forth a lot. It probably depends on what city in the country they're in, what they're wearing that day, um, what their political beliefs are, and who they're willing to throw under the bus to gain power. I feel like somebody like that probably has quite a bit of movement between not power and subaltern. Um, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know this is in the original version. I'm not sure if it's verbatim in this one, but Cizen says in the original version of this piece that not all gay men are faggot subaltern. I'm going with this example. I know
Yeah.
that's not the same as Twinkie bisexuals,
Mhm.
but we'll get back to you, Twinkie cis bisexuals. Also, I love you, but as a category, um, some gay men exist in the power category. They are gender conforming, whatever.
You're
They
like
play the game. They're
Anderson
white.
Cooper's.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Mm.
exactly. But there are also gay men who are faggots, and anybody who's in that position can tell you that they are because they have had experiences. They are not treated the way other men are treated, and it's probably kind of followed them around through locker rooms and bathrooms and the playground and getting on the bus and moving through life most of the time. And that's a very different experience. Um, so there is no like hard line there, but I think if you've been faggotized, you kind of know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you feel that danger. Um, and I think that would also be relevant to the question of what about the femboys. I would say most people who get called femboys would be probably in the subaltern, but it depends on
Yeah.
what's going on.
Um, I will be right back. I can still hear you, so I'll just be a minute if you want to start reading the next section.
Sure, perfect.
Cool.
I tell you what, they are subaltern in Russia. Yes, it's also very contextual. It is all highly contextual. Um, and like even just like speaking for myself, like I have both male privilege at work in a lot of ways and some amount of like faggot subalternization in like walking down the street and apparently still being underpaid compared to everyone every time they do an equity survey at my work. So like people shut up when I talk, but I also make less than all the cis people. This
So are
shit's
you
complicated.
are you speaking for all the Twinkie bisexual men then?
I guess so. I'm soft launching my bisexual arc lately.
Well, let
Maddie
me
sits up
know.
in bed and wakes up. She's as a representative for big bisexual.
Uh,
Okay, 1A, identifying contradictions. Broadly, the system can be understood as containing nested contradictions, which interlock and interfere with each other. Firstly is the contradiction between the powers and not powers plus subalterns, the contradiction between the ruling class and the ruled classes. We can call this the primary contradiction of this system. But there are also secondary contradictions. Among these, 1. The contradiction between the powers and not powers against the subalterns, the legitimate genders versus the punitive gender. 2. More granularly, the contradiction between the powers and the not powers alone. 3. Again, with granularity, the contradiction between the non powers alone and the subalterns. And 4. Finally, the contradiction between the powers and the subalterns. There are peculiarities to each contradiction, and there are peculiarities to the character of each class. Um, so, class conflict can play out between any like dyad or grouping of these categories. 1B, class permeability. Of course, we understand that the value of a given framework of analysis, a given perspective through which we view our world, is rooted in its functional utility, which is tied to its explanatory power. We will hopefully soon see the broader utility of this particular framework for understanding gender and the specific phenomena it has the capacity for explanatory power for. However, for now, let us discuss the most basic elements of this system which distinguish it from the gender binary as a framework of analysis. Firstly, the gender ternary does not draw the lines as man, woman, other, nor is it an analog for cis man, cis woman, transgender. It is critical to understand this. The problem with revisionist and liberal feminisms is this understanding of the gender binary, both because it draws the lines in the wrong places and because it presupposes that these boundaries are primarily impermeable. Um, and some of this is stuff that we've already talked about a little bit here.
yeah.
Um, but I think maybe it's worth highlighting, and this is something that in your piece on Substack you kind of glance at, that there is this possibility for some trans people to move up into the not power or power categories based
hmm
on passing, stealth, access to certain privileges, and things like that. Just
Yeah, and at least
an example.
conditionally, circumstantially, or at least attempt to, sometimes not successfully. Um, someone like Blair White is someone who is trying really, really hard to get into the not power class by distancing herself from people in the subaltern. And I'm not like those gross AGP freak trainee sex perverts. I'm a like normal, proper woman. Um, you, you know, um, there's always there's always the option to like try to throw people under the bus to gain an advantage. Some people are more successful at it. Um, I mean, I kind of don't want to spoil the essay because I know we're getting to some juicy stuff
Sure,
about that. Some real juicy queer discourse.
sure.
Uh,
Perfect. Okay, well then
but
we'll
yeah,
just yeah, we'll just keep going rather than getting into the weeds then. But but yeah, I did, and this was a point that you made in your Substack about how the idol gynephilia bullshit is like another attempt to try and draw these lines of like, no, they're the
yeah,
ones in the subaltern. We're the good kinds
hmm
of trans women who are trying
yeah,
to be like the
exactly.
not powers.
hmm
in this hope of like grasping your way up. I don't know why I always
Yeah.
picture it as a
And if
cliff.
we, yeah, I mean, if we hate the AGPs enough, then they'll allow us into the good club. Like,
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Because we're subalterning so hard someone else, we can just scramble our way up that cliff
yeah, I
into
don't
the
think
nut
it
power.
seems to work too well for trans women.
No, no, because it's so conditional. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the Republicans still hate Blair White. They don't respect her.
right. Yeah. I mean, give it 10, 20 years and maybe we'll have more like trans woman Milo Yiannopoulos analogs. But like, it didn't even work for Milo Yiannopoulos as like gay
Yeah,
man.
no, that's another good point. Yeah, the ex-gay movement is a very similar thing. And like, it worked for him so long as he was useful. And then, kind of the moment he stopped being useful, they didn't give a shit and they kicked his ass back down.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So this stuff can be very, very
And
conditional.
yeah, Funky Fresh Fangit brings up a really good point too about how one is racialized by society also plays a huge part. And that's another one of the things that like I really love about this is I don't know, I'm white, but I feel like a lot of this can explain race dynamics in a lot of ways. Um, I feel like it explains groups like the Irish who, whose whiteness has been very conditional, and who were kind of only afforded whiteness because they started oppressing other groups. I mean, like the Irish people, like a lot of them became cops and started oppressing black people, and like that was how they earned their whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it explains like what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now, where Jewish people, a very like historically subaltern group of people, is now gaining scraps of acceptance and faux support just because they're oppressing someone else harder,
Mm-hmm.
someone more brown than them. Um, I and then even on like not quite as grand a scale, I feel like this analysis can be really useful at just like looking at your local activist scene, looking at like your local queer hangout, looking at your local friend group. And I think it just kind of like this is the way that hierarchy just tends to develop. Somebody ascends to power, that person gains a group of followers that know their place, and everything gets established by oppressing and kicking out and treating some other group like shit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of thing, it happens in small groups just as much as it happens on big large scales too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it really works for this framework for talking about things like the social construction of whiteness and how that definition changes over time.
Yeah.
Um, it even makes me think of something that Brianna slash Jenny from the Black Bloc on Instagram talks about, that your race position is based on your distance from blackness,
Hmm.
not like people can mince words about like, oh, I'm half Hispanic, I'm my, or like lots of white people pull the like, oh, my great great grandmother was indigenous or whatever. Like it, in terms of legally, structurally, historically, access to resources, who's been invaded and subjugated the most. It's it's how close you are to blackness, more than anything else, because almost every other category is there's this permeability with whether or not you're considered white, and
Yeah.
and and the white ideal is this standard that lots of different groups of people have been penalized to a lesser extent than black, especially black enslaved people, but are penalized for not meeting that standard of whiteness. And I've talked about that with regard to like hillbilly identity as well too. Lots of similarities there.
And you
Um,
also see too, with how like kind of the only way for a black person to attempt to ascend is to participate in the subalternization of black people. You see that with someone like Candace Owens, who, you know, every scrap of power they have is because they're just consistently reinforcing racism.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You either align yourself with the police state, you align yourself with the subjugation of other black people, or you make some attempt to pass or have children who will pass or things like that. Again, just reinforcing that hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah. The utility of the power non power subaltern model is specifically that of not using the words man or woman. This allows us to describe a different relationship between these genders. Further, these genders are permeable as classes frequently are. Just as in enormously difficult circumstances, a proletarian can acquire capital and become a member of the bourgeoisie, and far more common, a member of the bourgeoisie can lose their capital and be forcibly proletarianized, so can members of the P, NP, and SA genders move from one gender class to another. Gender class inclusion is provisional. It is a consequence of factors which are directly and causally linked to a given individual's relationship with power within the broader gender class system within which they are embedded. 1C. The peculiar character of the subaltern class. A prevailing understanding within contemporary frameworks of gender is that transgender identity is an aberration of patriarchal society. Patriarchal society, so the aphorism goes, seeks the eradication and extermination of the Tiesler because of her transgression of the boundaries. The Tiesler in this paradigm is some form of failure of policing power of gender hegemony and something inherently transgressive in her existence. We posit instead that this is putting the cart before the horse, that actually the dynamic is inverted. The subaltern gender class is a necessary intrinsic element of the gender hegemony. The gender hegemony needs subalterns. This is because the gender subaltern class serves a purpose. It is the punitive gender. It is the gender you are sent to upon failure to comply. Subaltern gender is a prison. Gender hell, Gehenna and Tartarus. It serves as the eternally standing threat implicit to the system. If ye should so sufficiently transgress the bounds of gender, woe be upon ye, for so shall ye be stricken with the mark of Tiesler and be driven from the lands. Specifically, we understand as thus: gender subalterns must exist because being made subaltern is the embodied act of punishment for gender transgression, the mechanism by which the classes are kept in line.
And I just want to jump in there because I do really like that. Um, again, like I feel like there's that certain type of person that talks about gender being a radical act, and that like trans people existing is going to like destroy patriarchy, and like we're the cog in the machine that'll like tear it all down. And this is flipping that, and it's like, no, like we're necessary to its existence. Without the threat of third gendering and subalternization, you the not power class isn't going to reinforce its own oppression. It takes that threat of subalternization for the not power class to be comfortable with its own oppression. Um, because otherwise, like they would just rebel and turn it and cause a revolution themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Instead of holding on to what conditional power they have. And like, people are so aware of this, like from such a young age. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
just what I like keep going back to in my mind. Just like some of the earliest
Totally.
lessons about gender you learn as a kid is like the fear of subalternization, basically. The subaltern gender exists as the punitive gender, in service of the need to keep the not powers in check should they start to get ideas in the sense of political consciousness. in their eternal dialectical contradiction with the power gender, and in service of the need broadly to curtail class traitorism by reifying the superstructural elements of the gender class ruling ideology, by maintaining the integrity of the boundaries between these gender classes, and to act as one of the mechanisms by which gender class mobility is controlled and mitigated. Gender
I feel
is
like
a
I'm doing the thing where I just say what the essay is going to say next.
No, I think that's good. I think that's good to like signpost and help people like
Yeah,
process
yeah.
shit. So please, by all
No,
means.
it's just funny because I didn't realize that that was like literally the next paragraph. But yeah, anyways, go ahead.
No, no. Like I think, like with what you were saying, like so much of what gets in the way of or as something that definitely affects women in the not power category from advancing their feminism is like there's just constant fear of like I'm gonna be a woman incorrectly. I'm being unattractive.
Yeah.
I'm being too loud. I'm being too angry. I'm being whatever.
Well, and also
Like,
why like sometimes women can be the harshest policers of gender. Like sometimes women can be far more cruel about it than men. Um, and this explains why it's in their best interest, or quote unquote best interest, why they're led to believe it's in their best interest to do that.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and we even see it. Like I've written about some of that research before, finding that this was a study of trans men in the workplace. The people who sexually harassed them the most were cis women, and that's because I think because it is very similar to what we see in like bullying research in high schools. It's not the people at the top of the hierarchy who do the most violence. It's people who are in an
Mhm.
insecure middle position, and they're trying
Yeah,
to snipe
every bully
downward.
group has that ringleader who's got all the goons following them.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it's the goons, the people who are in an insecure position, that actually do most of the damage because
Mhm.
they have something to fight for, where it's they feel more threatened, so they lash out.
No, not gooners. That's something else.
No, gooners are cool. It's a pro gooning space. Gender is a class system. Gendered violence exists to control the movement within and between those classes. The subaltern gender class is one peculiar form of gender violence, which exists to be a punitive class in which one is thrust upon sufficient transgression of gender class ideology or correct protocol. Number 2, material base. Gender class and gender depression have existed for a long, long time in human society. They certainly predate the dawn of the age of capitalism. But the reality is that gendered violence and gender class continue to exist because of their utility for capital at this juncture. Gender class is a social technology which exists not in direct contradiction to capital and its custodianship, but rather in service of this. In this way, the gender class rule and the bourgeois class rule work together to replicate each other and support each other, strengthening them both. For this reason, any sufficiently Marxist politic should also understand the necessity of addressing the contradiction of gender, among others, and any sufficiently feminist politic must understand the world through a Marxist framework which understands the loci of power within bourgeois class rule. Gender class as a social technology precedes capital, but now exists in service of it on both a material base and on a superstructural level. Indeed, these things are heavily intertwined. It is a well understood and established feminist understanding of how gender class organizes reproductive and domestic labor in service of the need of capital. In this era, primarily through the social technology of the nuclear family. It allows for control and the maintenance of the means of reproduction of the labor force. Further, it allows for the production of the conditions of children's subservience to and oppression by adults, which in turn is required for the successful ideological replication of the current class rule, and in producing the conditions for the maintenance of this material basis of their political economy. Gender, heterosexuality, and the nuclear family are all interrelated and truly cohesive social technologies which exist to maintain the conditions of the replication of capitalism. Heterosexuality and the nuclear family exist as technologies which utilize the classes generated by gender hegemony to omnipresently police society, maintaining the conditions of both their self replication and the replication of capitalism.
So one of the other things that it's touching on here, I can't remember where exactly it came from, but there's the a lot of feminism will talk about fuck, I'm drawing a blank. Um, oh, the patriarchal bargain. Um, and it's the bargain that patriarchy offers to trans women. And in this case, or not to trans women, sorry, to women. And in this case, like very specifically mothers, it shows up in a lot of ways. But one of the ways that it shows up is, by telling mothers, if you accept like full subservience to your husband and give up all of your power to your husband and you make that patriarchal bargain, we'll give you someone you can have power over. We'll give you children. You can be the boss of children. You can order them around. You can tell them what to do. Um, and it's again the way that not power class is incentivized to participate in its own oppression by oppressing a third class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to the kind of material privileges that, at least for like wealthy white women, especially, are kind of promised
Mm-hmm.
to them, like, this is why you take this bargain and fulfill this role. Um,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. You factor race into it, and then it's, you take this bargain, and you're also going to have power over, all the slaves that we hired to take care of the house.
mm-hmm.
Um, Historically, it was like the woman's job to be in charge of the slaves at the household.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think, what's the name of the book? I think the book's called like "Ask the Woman Who Owns Him" or "Ask the Woman Who Owns Her." That's about like the violence of like white slave owning women
mhm.
in the American South. Um, and yeah, so this section is really talking about how, in order for capitalism to reproduce itself, it needs this constant, readily available labor force, and we have this gender structure that puts people, um, women, not power, people in that category, in the role of raising children, producing the new labor force. This really exploitative arrangement where they're usually not compensated for it in any way, or very undercompensated, but gender just provides this framework that makes that much more like automated and indoctrinated into people. Um, and so it's like,
It makes it seem natural.
right, yeah, yeah, it's somebody's natural role. It's what you're supposed to do. This is what life is.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so capitalism is kind of like parasitically glommed onto this existing gender system and used it or something. At the risk of being a bit brusque, I believe that this is both important and necessary to discuss in an essay like this, but also not the primary novelty of the analysis, as far better minds than mine have discussed reproductive labor and political economy in volumes upon volumes. As such, we will move on to discuss potentially more relevant and novel junctures of analysis.
Also, just another, just like aside on that too, is that again, one of the ways that like trans women specifically are subalternized and um, is through our lack of ability to participate in reproductive labor. Um, when, kind of one of the defining hallmarks of gender under patriarchy is that those in the not power class are making babies, um, and you can't make babies, then you're automatically excluded from that class.
Right.
You don't really have the hope of being a trad wife. You don't have the option of making the patriarchal bargain.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Um, and that's just a big part of how those lines are drawn, and how people get penalized. Um, 3. Ideological gender and mechanisms of control. You are not how you identify. You are not what clothes you wear, how you talk, how you act, which bathroom you piss in, what designation you mark on your documents, or your favorite drink. You are gendered without consent, against your will, as an act of violence. Yes, frequently as a result of many of these factors, but not through them. Gender is done to you, and you have no choice in the matter. It does not live inside of you, but rather it lives in the world, in the social sinew and how they entangle and ensnare you. 3A. What then of the they fab? Here we go. An evergreen question that has tortured me, and perhaps you, has been the question, what even is socialization, anyways? Many trans feminist discourses would contend with the question of gendered socialization on its own terms, seeking to articulate the precise sciences of why and how transgender women are able to claim the title of female socialized and therefore gain the right to have an opinion on gendered violence. I contend that the reality is orthogonal. There is no spoon. Socialization is not a process which is unique and specific to each given gender. Rather, there is one
Which I feel
socialization.
like that is also something that you have like written about a lot and said pretty frequently. I mean, just in your essay, like the myth of female socialization, there is no like one hegemonic socialization that exists for every woman. It is unique and like it's not unique and specific to each gender. It's just kind of a process everyone goes through.
Right. Yeah, this passage that we're about to get into, it feels very like in alignment with like things that I've written and others have written about this stuff, and it's very like,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, yes, we're cooking together here, you know. Socialization is not a process which is unique and specific to each given gender. Rather, there is one socialization, the human socialization, a general process of gender inscription and violence, which produces the countless unique experiences of gendered violence all members of humanity are subject to. It is the DNA of gendered violence, able to express any countless number of ways in different given contexts, but the same code on a fundamental level. How it responds and manifests is unique in each case and is determined by a number of factors. But the reality is that it is one single unified force, the force of gender violence. This is why people are not male socialized or female socialized. We are gender socialized, and this gender socialization does violence to all of us. The violence mutates given a particular context, and some of that violence is the violence which is requisite for indoctrination and enlistment into the gender class of power, which, as we have established, has everything to gain from the gender class rule. Um, yeah, love it. No notes.
Yeah.
We all
I feel like
observe the
anybody
gender rules.
familiar with your writing should get that. I don't know. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
good.
love the
I like
DNA
it.
metaphor that she uses here.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
That like the gender rules that come
Yeah,
out in a
and
given
then it's
context vary. But sorry, go ahead.
no, just that yeah, exactly. The the gendered socialization is the DNA, it's the code, it's the instructions that go out, but yeah, I mean depending on which gene is getting expressed is how it like manifests and what it actually looks like, and it can take on a whole bunch of different shapes.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Um, and it even makes me think of like how cis women can be some of the harshest enforcers, not just of sexism, but at women, but also towards men too, or like or mothers
mhm.
toward their sons. Like this is how you need to
Yeah,
behave,
yeah.
or like if we're gonna date, you need to be a man in the proper way, and all that kind of toxicity. Like it's
Hmm.
not like they didn't pick up on the rules just because they were women.
Yeah, and like how many? women will. I don't. I feel like we need to not blame women the entire problem,
Of
the
course, yeah.
entire thing. But I think it's easy to see why the power class stays in power. It's like, yeah, they're fucking dicks and they exploit people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a more interesting conversation to think about why the not power class reinforces itself so
Mm-hmm.
much. There's more meat there to talk about.
Right.
I don't think they're more to blame, but there is more to talk about.
Right. Yeah, no, definitionally they don't have the power, right? Like
Yeah,
so like
yeah.
this
So
is
that's
not
the paradox is like if you don't have the power, then why are you attached to this oppressive system so much? And like that's the paradox. That's what this essay gets at, and that's why it's so interesting to talk about that class.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I think if you don't have the power or you don't perceive yourself as having the power to upend it, then yeah, your psychology is going to do a lot of weird stuff to make peace with it
yeah.
and justify it.
Hmm.
Um, and it is very fascinating. What then of the they fab? The reality that must be understood, the articulation which will ruffle feathers in all directions, and which has been the locus of a significant amount of controversy in trans feminist spaces, is suitably encapsulated by the infamous specter of the they fab. The reality is that they fab and transgender are themselves incoherent political classes as they are tautologically defined. The assertion, I am transgender because I identify as transgender, is circular if applied to an analysis of power. The reality is, of course, that it is trivially true that everybody who identifies as transgender is transgender, if we are using the definition of transgender to be anyone who identifies as such. The reality is much simpler, unfortunately. You are the gender you are forcibly gendered as by gender class. Gender is distinct fundamentally from gender identity as we understand it. Gender class does not care what you think or say you are. Your gender is assigned not by document or by pronouncement or creed, but by the violent application of hegemonic force. It can be a consequence which is affected by your choices, feelings, and expressions, but these things do not determine your gender. Let me be clear. Not all those who identify as something will align neatly within these categories. Just as not all who identify as non binary are intrinsically subaltern in gender, likewise, not all who identify as transmasculine or even transfeminine are intrinsically politically underclassed. Rather, this is itself a mechanism of how much one transgresses or complies with punitive gender force. Further, there are people who are, by all means, within the contemporary discourses, cisgender, who are meaningfully subalternized by gender hegemony. There have been valiant, halting attempts to be able to encapsulate these nuances, which trouble and entangle the coherence of the trans feminist structure. Patch updates, which sought to make the overall engine usable through a terminal quagmire of glitches. I think of social technologies like the category of non-binary lesbian, trans masc butch, trans masc femme, etc. Identities which, and I say this without derision, seek to pull coherence from a system which will not give them it. To derive gender class from identity, which is to say how one identifies, is itself an idealist error, which locates the origin of gender class as a manifestation of a spiritual ritual of identification, and which retroactively creates a past experience of gender class after identity is achieved. This is necessarily incoherent. Gender is never a choice. To say trans men are men is as much of a tautology as to say I am a transgender woman because I identify as such. It is a liberal analytical concession to the prevailing discursive technologies of the transgender tipping point era, which were strategic decisions which prioritized the legitimization of validity rather than a correct materialist analysis of gender.
God. Okay. I am so happy to see that called out. I
Yeah.
am so over like gender theory that talks about validity. Like, I don't know. I have a post about it on Instagram too, but I feel like validity is something that you need to discover for yourself. It's an internal thing that like you've got to grapple with and figure out. Like, seeking validity from other people is in the world is just always going to be a dead end. And I just love how like it points out how toothless that is and how much it has like cost us being actually able to talk about like material conditions. And also just like, I don't know, the whole what is a woman? Oh, a woman is anyone who says they are. And it's like, really? Like,
Right. Thanks. That's sweet, I guess, but
yeah, it's like that doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel valid. That doesn't like help my self-esteem in any way. And then it's also just like, are we really gonna say that? Are we really gonna say like if Hulk Hogan said they're a woman that like they're a woman? I mean, like, good for her. Like, great. I hope you live your best life, and and I hope like I love and respect you as a person. But it's like it takes all the toothlessness or all the teeth out of like trans women or women. And it's like, no, we're women because the world fucking sees us that way and treats us like garbage because of it. Um, yeah, I don't know. That was my little angry rant.
yeah. No, no. And I love how this piece calls out how like um how nonsensical and sometimes bad faith it is, to go with the context of the they fab, for someone to say, "Oh, I am allowed to be centered in this conversation because I've just basically like put my arrow in the ground and then drawn the target around it. Like I've put myself
Mhm.
in the trans category, which again, how
Yeah,
you identify is and feel is that like that is valid. Like nobody's saying that you can't actually identify as these things, but that doesn't necessarily describe what your class position is. Like if you have
and
the not power status, you can't just retroactively say that you don't unless something's changed.
exactly. Exactly. And I want to just like kind of quickly define VAFAB, because I feel like there's sort of two common uses. There's some overlap between them. Um, One of them is like a derogatory word for non-binary AFAB people, and it is used to say like, "Oh, you're not actually non-binary. You're just faking it." Blah blah blah. Not cool. I don't support that. Um, the other usage of the word gets used at people who are non-binary AFAB, but in such a way that they very much cling on to their status as like women, as female socialized. They really distance themselves from trans women. They leverage the fact that they're non-binary or trans to speak over trans women, but not ever from like a place of solidarity. And like what this essay is talking about is that for that type of person, um, they're not being gender classed the same as a trans woman.
Right.
Um, in a lot of cases they're being gender classed as like a woman, as someone of the not power class, probably like towards the bottom of that class, but like still in that class. And that type of person will really like leverage their identity to both hang on to being a woman while also speaking over and shoving down trans women farther into the subaltern.
Mm-hmm.
um, I kind of like that this essay goes there.
Yes. Yeah.
um, and I feel like it addresses kind of the two different ways that they fab is used, where one way is kind of the validity discourse way to like attack someone's identity and say like, oh, you're not really valid, you're not trans, blah blah blah. But then the other way that it's used, that maybe it's a shitty word, but I feel like there's at least more of an argument there of like the gender structure does not see you as trans.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just doesn't. And when you're speaking on trans issues, like that's something you need to be aware of.
Right. Right. Because a lot of those people, and that you go into this in your piece about who is trans misogyny exempt versus who is trans misogyny affected. If you have this little
Yeah,
parachute that you're going to pull, if there is some possibility of you being subalterned and people starting to think that you're trans in some way, or especially trans feminine, and coming at you for it, these the they fab who like really identifies with being a fab, they see that as a part of their identity. Those people are the quickest to say, "Oh, I have a vagina. I was female socialized. I had this experience.
exactly.
I had a girlhood. I'm not." They'll do it to
Hmm.
protect their own skin
And
and protect
that's
their own status.
exactly. And yeah, that essay is called "Trans Misogyny Exempt," not as who you are, but as something you do. And someone like that is really quick to like say, I experience trans misogyny, I experience subalternization because I got harassed in the bathroom once. And it's like, okay, but then what did you do after you got harassed in the bathroom? You cried about how you were a real woman and didn't deserve it. Like your reaction and instinct was to immediately throw trans women under the bus. Your way power, you know, um, yeah. So that's why I was working on that essay before this came out, but I feel like it works really well in parallel with it because it does talk more about trans misogyny affected and trans misogyny exempt as like power structures that people have access to rather than just like fundamental truths about someone's identity.
Right. Yes. I just linked to that piece that you wrote in the chat, and that's why the audio fucked up for a second. Sorry, everyone. I took the gamble. But please check that out, and also follow Annika on Substack, because she's been writing some great stuff on this. And this is like such a great companion piece, and it like what you've written here with this Substack piece is just like it's such a cool different way to kind of wade through the waters of these debates that people often have in bad faith of like, well, who counts as trans misogyny exempt? Who
Yeah,
this if this person identifies as a AFAB trans woman, or this person does this experience, or like, no, like, do you pull that ripcord? Do you pull that parachute?
exactly.
Do you use that
And this is
violence?
why Lady Gaga is trans misogyny affected.
I love this take because she had the opportunity to say, no, I'm not that. And she was like, so what if I do? Like, I'm not going
Yeah.
to shit on trans women. Like,
Yeah, most people when they get transvestigated, if they're not a trans woman, they're gonna immediately resort to getting defensive, saying they're not, being offended that they were compared to a trans woman, trying to justify all the ways that they aren't one, comparing their body to a trans woman, to a theoretical, hypothetical trans woman. Um, Lady Gaga is just like, so what if I am? Who
it's
cares?
simple.
Trans women
Yeah.
are cool.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's still refreshing now, like 10, 12 years later, whenever it was that she said that.
Exactly. She didn't try to claw her way back into the not power class. She was just like, fuck it.
Right. Because when you pull that,
Solidarity.
what you're doing is you're pushing trans women down and still saying that there are people who should be subalternized, and
Yeah,
I'm not that, and I'm going to
exactly.
reinforce that. Yeah. So everybody, please check out that piece too, and follow Annika. From a personal conjecture, I believe this was due to a desire to align the transgender rights movement as a corollary to the relative conditional success of the gay rights movement. which has hitched itself to the cart of the institution of marriage through the gay marriage movement. It appealed to a sensibility of broadening the categories of legitimacy, incrementally, to be utterly clear, and vie for conditional class ascension. The gambit was essentially thus: I'm gay, but I'm not a faggot. I was born this way, I did not choose this, and I am just like you. I am a straight couple but gay. We just want to get married and raise a family like the rest of you. The implicit corollary to this, of course, is unlike those hairy dykes / weird T-slurs / polyamorous freaks, etc. The point was how it did not transgress the hegemonic system of power, but rather slot in as an additional technology. Not an overhaul or a rework, but an integrative modification which maintained the integrity and coherence of the underlying power structure. The answer to what then of the they fab is that the they fab is not a power class, and that many different people within these same identity categories can have any number of divergent and contradictory and antagonistic locations within gender class. 3b. Man as ideology, class traitorism, enlistment, and punitive ejective subalternization. To return to an earlier point, the role of the subaltern is the gender class into which people are ejected upon sufficient transgression of given gendered protocols, whether that be attempted and failed aspiration toward power by not powers, incorrect behavior and enlistment in power ideology by power thus subalterns, or others. Tying in another earlier point, that gendered socialization is a single unified force, we gain the below understanding. The inverse of toxic masculinity is the creation of the gender subaltern underclass. This is a manifestation of the same unifying phenomenon of gender violence. It is an analytical error to believe that transmisogyny is a distinct force from general misogyny. Rather, it is the same force, which manifests differently when applied to distinct contexts. This is necessary to understand, as what this perspective communicates is that we have both everything to gain from understanding our liberations as tied together, beyond a solidarity perspective, but from a very practical material understanding that these things are one and the same force, and that they cannot be successfully overturned without overturning all parts of the system. I thought this was a really interesting point in the piece, that transmisogyny and misogyny are the same thing in an essential way. That they are playing the same function in an overarching way. And I think that, like, I mean, it just translates to all those situations in which a lot of transmisogyny is just like, you're just being sexist to that trans woman and you're a trans dude. That's just sexism, like it's just sexism
Yeah.
within a particular context or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they definitely both reinforce each other. Um, yeah, and I mean, a lot of the times too, when I like do describe my experiences with trans misogyny, when I have like really good open talks with cis women, um, a lot of them are able to relate in some way because it's not that different from what they experience. Um, it's just some of the language and stuff um, is a little bit different. Like the shape of it looks different, but like the force itself is usually pretty much the same. Like we're both being told that we're not doing woman right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and it's just part of the ways that people try to like distance themselves from like acknowledging it is acting like talking about trans misogyny is so complicated, so academic,
Mm-hmm.
and all this shit. And like a lot of times it's like this, the way this
Yeah.
falls into place is it's the same as sexism. Like who in the group is doing all the work, who's getting talked over, etc., etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Yeah.
Yeah.
we might ask, what are the mechanisms slash reasons underlying the subalternizing ejection from the legitimate gender classes, power and not power, into the subaltern gender class? In response, we might offer a few preliminary contemplations. In the case of the power class, it protects against specifically class traitorism. Those who are ejected from power and enter subaltern class are those who refuse to or cannot sufficiently uphold the necessary ideological project of the power class, and therefore fail to correctly maintain the conditions for its replication. As such, it is a safety mechanism against an existential threat toward its coherence as a class system, in as much as making these boundaries incoherent threatens the potential for the replication of the material conditions of gender. It is a policing of correct ideological compliance, as failure to comply threatens the material base. Um, and this makes me think about something that you said to me in a conversation before writing about, I think,
Mm-hmm.
a piece that I wrote about transmasculinity, where you said, manhood is defined by exerting power over women,
Yeah.
violent power over women. And if a man can't do
Mm-hmm.
that, he's less of a man, or he's not a man in society.
Yeah, and that's something too that I even see within, this power, not power, subaltern framework is that even a man who defends women, a man who's like a feminist, um, gets cast down from the power class.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if he's not willing to oppress women, he's not given power. Um, and that's how this system like continually reinforces itself. Um, yeah, like the myth of like the good man. The reason that there are no like good men is because once they start being good, they aren't given power to change anything anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's immediately punished as
Hmm.
you're.
And they may not be like fully subalternized for it, but like they're going to be cast down with women for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're gonna have that threat of subalternization put in front of them. They're gonna be called a fag
Oh,
or
that
whatever. Like,
definitely. Yeah. Oh, yeah,
yeah.
totally. No, like, yeah. I mean, if you're like a feminist man and like side with women and talk about women's issues, like, yeah, you're gonna get called a fag.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You can be the straightest guy in the world, and like, they're still gonna call you a fag for it.
Right. Yeah. Um, and then also men who lack the power to exert power over women. Again, disabled men
Hmm.
come to mind, but
Yeah.
lots of groups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Disabled men, racialized men, mhm,
Right.
poor men.
Poor men. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
In the case of the not power class, it's very straightforward. The use of subalternization as a mechanism of punitive violence is one which violently suppresses attempts at upward class transgression. It also maintains the integrity of the class categories of power and not power, but by keeping the subordinate class subordinate, by punishing those who attempt to achieve upward mobility. Another question here then becomes, what of trans men? Anyone who knows and interacts with people who are conventionally understood as being trans men understand that they broadly fit into two categories: people who succeed at inclusion within the category of men by succeeding at performing ideological manhood, and those who fail or refuse to do so, who, by merit of whatever confluence of factors which result in their failure to comply, are forcibly also ejected into subaltern gender. I think this is specifically also true of some people who fall into the category of cisgender men. In the original article, this mechanism was that which prompted the coining of the term fagotization, as I believe that the process of subalternization slash fagotization is a process which can be uniquely illustrated by the ways faggots are not afforded man as a class. To
Hmm.
be a successful member of the power class, one must abide by the class interests of the power class. This means that one must actively choose to continue to enlist in the class of power. In this way, we understand that inclusion in the class of power is not a choice everyone is offered, but choosing to stay in this class is always a choice one must accept willingly, as it is an affirmed process of political enlistment in the project of gender class. We use the word choice here as a shorthand. There is a more proper articulation, dialectically, in which we could expound on the ways these social forces respond to given acts of affirming enlistment in the power class via acts of gendered violence, via the movement of the internal contradictions of gender class, etc., etc., etc. But that would be exhaustingly verbose and I think missing the point.
And I want to yeah, talk about trans men here for a minute, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, and just, you know, the definition of manhood under patriarchy is oppressing women. um and I think that is why you do see so many trans men who just kind of fucking hate trans women.
Mm-hmm.
um not all of them, but it's definitely a thing that happens, and this explains why it's incentivized. Um, it's almost like that patriarchal bargain gets sort of flipped from them, where it's just like, hey, you want to be a man? All right, well, part of that's hating trans women.
Mm-hmm.
We'll, you know, conditionally welcome you to the club if you participate in that. Yeah, gender affirming misogyny, exactly, Edge Pheasant. Um, and I think, it's why I have so much of an issue with some of the like trans misandry dudes. Um, because as much as there are like really terrible trans women who like violently hate trans men and say horrible, god awful things about them, there's just no power behind it.
Right.
None of them actually gain anything by doing that. Most of them fucking self destruct and implode. Um, it's not, you don't see the same thing as like the fucking, I guess this is a D-trans case, but the D-trans lawyer on Twitter that like recently went off the deep end and just started buddying up with J.K. Rowling and TERFs all because he hates trans women.
Right.
Um, and like he was able to gain power doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I don't know. The simple fact is that like misogyny is incentivized and rewarded. Um, and it's also why I get so frustrated at so much of this like, AFAB socialism innocent stuff, where it's like that same structure incentivizes anyone to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how they were born, like they're still incentivized and rewarded for taking advantage of the system.
Right. Right. And they're able to leverage some of the like the trans men pulling that shit are able to leverage some of the like not power position. This is the thing I talk about, like
Hmm.
able to weaponize white womanhood, right? Like, oh, I'm so fragile and need to be protected. So again,
Yeah.
it's especially white trans men and AFAB identified people who pull that shit. But like, yeah, it trans women are the women that trans men consistently have the most power over. Our
Mm.
ability to do sexist bullshit to cis women is more complicated. It definitely happens, but
Yeah.
it really is contextual, and we have different privileges over one another, and so it's kind of complex. But in any given space, it's very very easy for trans men to invoke gendered violence against trans women, and they do it to
Yeah.
jockey for position all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, should I keep reading? I know we're getting close to the wind down time for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I was gonna bring that up. I feel like we can probably finish this up. There's only a few more sections, but um yeah, maybe try to get through it a little bit quicker.
Sure.
I don't think the next few sections are too spicy, so yeah,
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll read through and I won't pause except for if you hook me.
cool.
3C. So why all the transphobic murder? A legitimate question toward this analysis might be why, if the existence of the subaltern is necessary to the service of the class interests of the power and gender hegemony broadly, might powers and not powers alike unite in enacting genuinely exterminatory violence against the subalterns? Does it not contradict their class interests? Are they just stupid? Of course, we can understand this as a result of ideological reaction left unchecked. We see this countless times over in all sorts of realms. Ideological reaction, which broadly serves the interests of the ruling classes in a given context, left unchecked, becomes its own form of power, which can no longer be curtailed. The machine eating itself alive by allowing ideological elements to run free like a cancer. The balance of maintaining the ideological superstructural elements of the replication of gender ideology is a delicate one, which requires safety valves to redirect political energies, which become too runaway, too feedback loop. I contend that certain forms of this kind of safety valve include the projects of liberal pop feminist discourse disseminators such as autostraddle, everyday feminism, etc. The same liberal ideology broadly, to redirect and recapture extant and nascent revolutionary political gender consciousness and utilize it as fuel for the enforcement and maintenance and balancing of gender class in service of gender hegemony. Like with the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, where the extermination of the former by the latter may be the ideological desire of the latter, even when it conflicts with their own class interests, and requires the intervention of the state to maintain the integrity of those class interests. So we can see how and why there might be an exterminatory impulse among more violently reactionary powers and not powers against these subalterns, even when it threatens their class interests. Again, like with the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, liberal false consciousness serves as a capture device for nascent revolutionary energies to redirect them toward the maintenance of the class system overall. Everyday feminism is bootstraps liberalism for gender hegemony.
And yeah, just real quick right there, I just want to say what we were talking about earlier with, your essays about like you're not going to girl boss your way out of things. You're not going to get a better raise just by talking to your boss about it. Like you're still a woman, you're still experiencing misogyny, you're still going to get paid less. The gender pay gap is real. Yeah, everyday feminism is bootstraps liberalism for gender hegemony.
Right. Yeah, this idea that if you act right, you don't have to worry about sexism. You can game your way out of it. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
that's not how it works. 4. Human costs. Why do we care about this? What is the issue with analyzing gender the way we have been? And what is at stake with regard to the ways in which transfeminism is an imperfect science? We care because there is a human cost. We care because being wrong is dangerous, because it leads to idealist and analytical errors, and political excesses and missteps. We care because systems which are wrong and analyses which are wrong chew people up as an inevitable and accepted consequence of their functioning as normal. There are countless people whose realities do not reflect the prescriptive designation of what their realities should be by transfeminism. People whose experiences contradict or conflict with the party line of trans feminist analysis. These people are not acceptable losses. They are not collateral damage. They are people whose lives are genuinely damaged or even ruined by the rudimentary and incomplete nature of contemporary transfeminist analysis. These people live realities which are not afforded coherence under the extant system. It is imperative we innovate new analytical technologies because every moment we don't, the human costs rack up. A system which cannot confidently answer a question like, was Kurt Cobain a transgender woman, to the point that the controversy of such a question becomes itself a meme, a joke, is a system which lacks coherence to a dangerous degree. It leads to violence done to innocents. It leads to mistakes. Conclusion. A future for feminism. Non-paths of transfeminism, paths of trans non-feminism. As I said in the original article, I do not feign to have the answers. I do not believe that this analysis is adolescent, let alone mature. I am myself just one woman with a halting understanding of many of the concepts I struggle to articulate, and this framework still needs significant honing and focusing if it's useful at all. But it is clear that there's a need for an innovation which reasserts the reality that feminism is a social technology we still need, because the contradictions of gender class have not been resolved. Like with anti imperialism and Marxism Leninism, there have been halting attempts to innovate alternative analytical technologies to a dialectical materialist feminism. The moribund analyses of incomplete transfeminism, the explicitly reactionary impulses of radical anti feminism, and the as of yet unnamed but burgeoning movement of reactionary transgender political analysis, which begets idealist errors which are themselves paths of trans non-feminism, seeking to fight transmisogyny without meaningful engagement with analyses of gender hegemony broadly. These are all ineffectual at resolving the primary contradiction of gender, just as vulgar anti-imperialist non-Marxists are unable to resolve the actual primary contradictions of imperialism. The alternative framework offered to attempt to address certain contradictions, this is gender fascism. No, it is critical that we understand the utility, the ongoing necessity of the technologies of analysis afforded by feminism. It is critical we understand that the fact that the correct analytical technologies of feminism have not been developed yet does not mean they cannot be. And indeed, if we are at all feminists, at all Marxists, at all committed to a future of a classless society, free from the chains of bondage, so we must be committed to a future where feminism is afforded the chance to innovate. A classless world is possible. We owe it to each other to build this world. And that's the piece.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I really like the conclusion and the end of that too, because I don't know, something that I found lacking with a lot of queer theory is kind of a movement away from feminism. Um, a lot of like the post-structural Judith Butler type of stuff of this. I don't know, it kind of stops recognizing misogyny as like a problem in the world, or at least people have definitely interpreted it that way. Um, gender gets viewed as kind of this like people being mean to you or like invalidating you or not using your correct pronouns instead of like this oppressive fabric that's like woven into our society. um yeah, I don't know, I'm struggling with like the words to it, but I love to see queer theory like recentering on feminism. And I guess where I was going with this is I feel like TERFs have done such a disservice to feminism, and within queer theory have become like the big bad scary enemy, that there's almost been a reaction to like eschew feminism and try to like invent something new. Whereas this is like, hey, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like feminism's great. We just need to tweak it a little bit. We need to continue developing it because that's what you do with technology. You iterate and you make it better each time. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
yeah,
honestly, that's something that has really been very beneficial to me in my friendship with you. Like, how, like, just reaffirming that, like, no, actually, a feminist analysis is still really needed here. Like, a lot of these things we need to still
yeah,
bring back and talk about that, like, like for various reasons,
and
not all of them noble or transgender. I was very alienated from a lot of feminism, and I think was on board with a lot of queer people who just we're no longer using that as a lens of analysis, and that you miss so much when you don't, you know.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of queer people have, attempted to adopt a like gender blind kind of view. Um,
Mhm.
have seen that as like morally correct and like, oh, I don't see gender. Oh, I just like judge the individual in front of me. And
Right.
I feel like I thought we learned our lesson with that in like the 90s with race blindness. Um, One, I don't buy it. I don't think it's true. Um, I think we're all running these algorithms in our heads and making prejudgments of people and trying to contextualize their behaviors in different ways. I don't think we're always conscious of it, but I think we're all doing it. Um, so if you're saying you're gender blind, you're just not examining the way that you do that. The
Mhm.
amount of absurdly, horribly transmisogynistic things I've had people claiming to be gender blind say to me, Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
Um, and then, the other thing too is that when you're saying you're gender blind, that means you're just blind to the structure. You're blind to the fact that like this person has a different gendered experience than this person. And that's just the reality of the world that we live in.
Mhm.
No amount of, and again, it's that kind of liberal, putting everything on the self and everything in like terms of self-actualization. No amount of like you doing the work to like become gender blind is going to change the fact that these two people have a different experience.
Right.
And
Right.
in fact, it's just gonna make it harder for you to see that they have a different experience. It's going to
Mhm.
make you less aware of that system because you've convinced yourself that like the morally correct thing to do is to just be gender blind.
Right. Yeah, it makes it so impossible to have any analysis of power.
Hmm.
It's yeah, it confuses so many things, and it's like it really has become like something that people just don't bring up. Like they'll talk about other analyses of power structures, but they will not list. And obviously, there's been a whole backlash to like Me Too and backlash to liberal white feminism, but people have thrown out feminism, period, in the pursuit or like in the name of like
Yeah.
distancing from those things,
Hmm.
and it's not the same thing. It's not like this is settled.
Yeah, no, there was definitely a major backlash against feminism like after the Me Too movement, and it seems like that kind of died out, and then any gender discussion after that was just kind of this like empty shallowness. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess that was around the same time as like the transgender tipping point, wasn't it? So that is when a lot of like this validity discourse kind of took over,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of became the new gender discussion after Me Too.
Yeah.
Hmm. I haven't
Yeah.
quite thought about that before.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things going on in there that would be really interesting to see somebody track, like how all of those things evolved and were used.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
like I just think of the most like down the line like liberal like a Slate magazine, and like how they just started writing more about trans stuff, but in this very like, oh whatever, there's all these weird kinds of people, who knows, nothing means anything anymore, and like then you just don't have a feminist
Yeah,
analysis.
yeah. It's like, yeah, I think like being gender blind is lazy.
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. It's like, oh, there's all these different kinds of people and I don't know what's going on. And instead of trying to understand any of it or like learn what, life's like for these people, I'm just gonna say I don't see gender and you're all just the wonderful Play-Doh to me.
Right. Right.
Like it's the cop out.
Yeah. Yeah. Or they just take old liberal feminism, white feminism, and just go like, well, they do the thing where they're like trying to like they'll be like people with vaginas, like, and it's like they have not updated again the technology
Women
at
and
all.
femmes.
Women and femmes,
Yeah.
all these different weird designations that they're trying to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
some kind of oppression happens, but I can't quite say who it happens to. Like,
Hmm.
great, thanks. Yeah.
I always hate too when I see like women and femmes because it's like I'm a butch trans woman. Am I included in that or not?
Right. Yeah. And it has the wrong mechanism. I know we already talked about this, but it's like your
Yeah,
presentation, whether you're femme, does not determine whether you're
exactly.
fucking
Yeah,
oppressed. Like,
yeah.
do people
But
think butch women have it easier? That's absurd, you know? Like, that's just fucking crazy.
yep.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, I do have to get going, but this has been really fun. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed watching it, and yeah,
Thank
uh,
you so
check
much
out
for
that
doing
essay
this. Yeah.
on Substack. Follow me on Instagram. I think it's Trans.Peaks.
Yes. Angela
Um,
Badalamenti. I'll stay on and
yeah.
drop all of your links in the chat.
Okay,
Just so
cool. That
just so
works.
people have it. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun. And thanks for putting up with my bad technology and bad internet. That was the fault of
Yeah,
everything.
no, this is great. I had a blast, Devin. We should do it again.
Yeah, I'd love that.
All right, yeah.
Right.
And then thank you to everyone else who watched. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Fun hanging out with you. Fun answering questions in chat. And y'all have a good night.
Yeah. See you soon. Bye. So we'll switch on over to single share. Boop. Oh, now I'm enormous. Oh no. Um not a man in the feminist conversation. Good God. Okay, let me just grab links for y'all in the chat. Presumably now OBS will work just great since for whatever reason it couldn't handle me dual wielding. Thanks everybody again for your patience and your help troubleshooting all the bullshit with the stream today. Uh, I'll just pull it up real quick. Actually, I can screen share too. I think. I don't think it's gonna fuck me up too bad. Here is the essay we've been talking about this whole time. I linked it at the beginning. I just wanted to shout it again one more time. The Cizen System Substack, the CizenSystem.substack.com. Gender Ternary and Subalternization Rebuild. Oh God, you're gonna see me sharing my own Twitch stream. There you go. Uh, and then I'll also grab all of Trans.Peaks / Annika's great stuff and links real quick as well, and drop those. And if you're watching the VOD right now, in the future, I will also have this stuff linked in the VOD. So please do give Trans.Peaks a follow and read her also excellent essay on who is TME and who is not TME. So I'll share my screen again. This is Annika's Instagram, Trans.Peaks, transgender Twin Peaks memes, and also lots of great gender commentary and writing and analysis, feminist analysis. Amazing stuff. And this is her Substack, Angela Badalamenti, but it's spelled like Badalamenti. TME is not who you are, but what you do. Really great piece. Just came out today. Has the bold and baller take that Lady Gaga is trans misogyny affected. Um, she didn't immediately resort to distancing herself from trans women. She didn't immediately reinforce the idea that being compared to a trans woman was a bad thing. So, based as a little monster, though lapsed because she's a Zionist. But we'll give Lady Gaga, we'll give Stephanie Germanotta this one. She not good on Israel, heinous on that, but she fucking nailed it on the not being trans misogynistic bit, and a long time ago. There's also this amazing video that Annika talks about in her piece on Substack. It's called American Reflex. It's on YouTube. Um, we won't watch it right now, but it is presumably cis woman walking through what neighborhood was it? Myrtle Beach, with a reflective mask on, and people are harassing her in this way that is incredibly trans misogynistic. This is a video from 2015, but it is forever timely and relevant, and really just shows like how when people are objectifying you and they don't know who you are as a woman, they like reach for subalternization. They start calling you a trans woman, they start calling you a man, and all these horrible things, and throwing things at you, and being really violent. It's a triggering watch, but if you are interested in trans feminist analyses, I really strongly recommend looking at it, because it's very moving and great, and I think um, Annika identifies it as just really showing a lot of like parallels in experiences, and like what being targeted by trans misogyny can look like, or what trans misogyny as a tool looks like when it's pulled out and weaponized against others. So fantastic watch. Uh, Thank you for being here, everyone. Uh, Sorry that the sound was so boned. I guess I need to buy a real computer, even though I bought this computer for streaming. Whoops, I didn't. I should have gotten a big boy computer instead of a laptop. Uh, I did a fucky wucky. But I will find some place to send y'all. For anybody who wants to stay just hanging out on Twitch, let's see who there is to raid. See if anybody I'm following is doing anything cool. Da, 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 da. It's late at night, so there's not as much stuff as usual on here. Let's see. Dreg Trashley's playing Dune Awakening. There's lots of animals, like chinchilla and rabbit streams. Oh, Summer Games Done Quick is happening. Oh, well, I'll send you guys there. They do not need the extra views, but Summer Games Done Quick is just a really fun speedrunning event, raising money for Doctors Without Borders. It's just fun speedrunning convention. It's fun to watch the crowd and everything. So why the hell not? Why not send you guys someplace fun for background noise? Thanks again, everybody, for being here. Gaming laptop's still gonna laptop. That's exactly true. I gotta get a PC. Thank you, y'all. Again, the VOD for this, I'll probably post it in two parts, because this laptop also can't handle video editing on that scale. Oops. My life is so busted. I'll post both the first part and the second part of this VOD to YouTube shortly. And yeah. Thank you so much for everybody's questions and contributions to the chat. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed reading your thoughts and being part of this conversation. And just thanks to the Cizen system for writing this amazing technology for us that has already been so helpful and elucidating to me. Just want to do all I can to sing its praises and shout it from the rafters. All right. Good night, everybody. And with that, I'll send you on over to Games Done Quick. Good night.